I will be genuinely shocked if anyone is still going through these videos listening to my overview of these chapters, as I'm sort of discovering this content and these slides for the first time, and then riffing on them with my own experience with the topics and my own knowledge about them, and telling stories when I can. So now we're moving on to the psychology of personality, and psychologists began describing what makes us similar. So the ways in which we're all the same. That changed, and I forget when exactly. I'd want to say the first third, maybe the end of the first third of the 20th century. We stopped looking at what makes us similar and started looking at what makes us different. So the ways in which people differ and how we can categorize them. So there are a bunch of means or methods or types of categories that have been used to divide people up. And so we'll look at a few of those now. But the main concept, the main way of going about understanding personality is looking at how you are similar to and different from others. And so much research has been done now that we can say pretty reliably, using each categorical system, where you land in the spectrum when compared to everybody else. So are you happier or more sad than other people? Or do you regulate your emotions as well or more poorly than other people? Are you extrinsically or intrinsically motivated? Do you desire spending time with other people or solitude? And so there's ways of kind of breaking up who we are into these various categories and then comparing us with other people. The reason why the categories stand is because there are marked differences between people, and those marked differences have consequences. So we'll look at a little bit of those as well. So personality is defined as the long-standing traits and patterns that propel individuals to consistently think, feel, and behave in specific ways. Very good definition. Personality is long-standing. It's relatively stable throughout your lifespan. So it's not something that you can change day to day. So your identity is something that you can change day to day, and you can manipulate. You can choose to show some parts of who you are and hide other parts of who you are. So we're not talking about identity, we're talking about personality. This is a stable part of who you are, and your parents probably recognized elements of your personality, and those elements won't change, or they'll change very little throughout your lifespan. Usually when you describe yourself, what you're describing is an identity. Personality is something that's relatively stable. So there's personality traits, which are stable, and personality states, which might come and go based on your environmental situation. It looks like there are background examples of how personality was defined, and I'm just going to pick on Hippocrates here because the Hippocratic way of understanding personality, which is before the Common Era, so this is 2,400 years ago-ish, a very long time ago, and we had this model for over 2,000 years. And medicine followed this model. And so it was believed that our personalities were moderated by fluids in the body. And so these were called humors. So you can look at choleric, melancholic, sanguine, and phlegmatic, referred to overproduction of one of those four humors. And it wasn't until modern medicine developed that we challenged that. So we had this theory of personality for a very long time. And then, Galen took that Hippocratic way of looking at the personality and organized a medicine around it. And so we had that until the modern era. Franz Gall, 1780, he must have been born in 1780 because I don't think he proposed phrenology. I'm realizing now that the dates that were given perhaps are the dates of birth of these people. So Franz Josef Gall believed, and actually I have this tattooed on my arm. So this is called a phrenological map. And it's understood, it was believed at the time that the shape of your skull predicted your personality. So that there's the word there, phrenology, under historical perspectives. So if there's like a big bump in your head in one location, like he believed that explained why you were confident or courageous. And then over here, that's why you were a coward, or here's why you're intelligent. And so like the personality could be mapped on the head. And so he had this map designed. And people did differ in their head sizes, and they do differ in personality, and it was as good a hypothesis as any in the lack of evidence, with any lack of evidence. Yeah, so it says 1825 is when the phrenological map was at least designed this way. And then here's another kind of example of the process of phrenology. All right, so Wilhelm Wundt was the first, I don't know that he's come up yet. He was the first experimental psychologist. So that was the late 19th century, so 1885-ish, 84 were the first like experiments that were conducted. And he described two axes on which all of those four personality types could be mapped. So strong versus weak emotions, and I'm sure you can identify what's a strong emotion and what's a weak emotion. And then temperament, so temperament that is highly flexible, or temperament that's relatively stable. And so you can see how those emotions, or excuse me, how those personality types can fall into each of those categories. And then in the 20th century, we have Freud's first comprehensive theory of personality, again based on his psychoanalytic assumptions and theories, that he believed that most personality was driven by these unconscious drives, and those were primarily sexual in nature. And then after Freud, there was a recognition that, okay, yep, there might be these drives happening, but they're not necessarily sexual in nature. That's how we get the neo-Freudian perspectives. The first model that's still used today, so the Galen's assumption of the humors being involved, Hippocrates' assumption of what personality comprised, we don't use those anymore. We do still use Freud's structure of the personality. So it's often described as an iceberg. So this is an iceberg in water, and we can understand that what is visible above the water, what we can actually see of the iceberg, and it's all that we know is there as far as we can see, that's the conscious part of who you are. So your desires, your thoughts, your appearance, it's what you can see, and what you show the world, that's your conscious personality. But there's also part of your personality that is below the surface of water, or below the level of consciousness. So Freud calls that the unconscious. So there's three aspects here of consciousness, or of your personality. The id is the base instincts. So going back to William James, you'll remember from the chapter on motivation, the basic instincts. So that's like your desire to eat, drink, sleep, and have sex. We don't often identify with those base animal emotions or instincts. So it's part of us. We're all driven by these instincts. However, we don't choose to say that's all we are. So that's beneath consciousness. It makes up a significant chunk of the iceberg, but we're not always aware of it. The ego is what we are aware of. It's what we choose to show the world. The ego in German is the I. So I am talking, I am listening, I am doing these things, I am consciously aware of them, and I choose to do them. The ego sort of controls the id instincts in order to make them more presentable. And then finally we have the superego. That is the wishes, generally the wishes of mom and dad, or the wishes of the community, when we try to manipulate how we appear, how we seem, what we show, what we hide. That's often governed by the superego. So the superego is always the best version of yourself, but for reasons that aren't yours. They're not you, otherwise it would be the ego. What's interesting in this model is that a lot of the superego is also in the unconscious because we have all of these influences around us and we don't always acknowledge them. So we've had experiences, according to psychoanalysis, we've had experiences growing up where we were influenced by maybe a teacher, maybe a coach, maybe a television program we watched, and we choose to become somebody maybe different based on this, but we don't remember that influence, or maybe we don't even acknowledge it. We refuse to admit that so-and-so influenced us. So a lot of that is unconscious as well. You can read about the Freudian slips and slips of the tongue, slips of the pen, slips of the typing fingers, if you'd like. So I went through those parts of the structure of the personality from a Freudian bent. There's some more basic examples. Okay, I think Freud's daughter proposed these defense mechanisms. And so let's go back to the structure here. Part of who we are is hidden from view, and according to Freud, in my interpretation of him, it's hidden from view because we don't want to show it. Maybe we're embarrassed by it. We don't want to be identified with it. So, but it's still part of us. Freud believed that those things that we hide show themselves anyway. And so we can't keep the unconscious invisible. Like, it's going to show through at some point. And Freud believed that that activity that's trying to suppress something and then it's still bubbling up is psychological disorder. So we don't like that. We don't want to identify with it. We say, oh, that's not me, but it is you. And so fighting to hide it is what causes psychological pain. So we go through lots of elaborate means of hiding who we are, and those are called defense mechanisms. We're defending ourselves against really ourselves, or being seen by other people as who we are. So a common one is being in denial. Try to think of something that I'm in denial about. Okay, yes, I'm in denial about not having all of the knowledge of this book. I'm not an expert in all of these areas, and I'm embarrassed by that. So I sometimes pretend like I do have all the answers. And if someone were to say, Dr. Whitehead, I think you're kind of dumb when it comes to personality, and I'll say, I'm not dumb. I'm actually I have a PhD, don't you know? And I'll try to hide it. So what I did was denied the reality, and then I intellectualized, which isn't on here. Yeah, it's not on here. So I tried to hide it even further by intellectualizing it. I can talk maybe in a sophisticated way that will make you want to back away from your claim, which is true, by the way. So a lot of our defensive behaviors are these defense mechanisms. You can look through all of them. Chances are, I rationalized as well. Chances are you use all of these, or some of them more than others, whenever there's something about yourself that you reject or that you do not accept. So when you psychoanalyze somebody, what you're doing is looking for evidence of defensiveness or these defense mechanisms. And when you see them, you think, what is it this person is trying to hide? What usually happens is someone will act in a way that seems unusual, or it will seem like the situation didn't really call for it. Someone tells a joke and someone laughs really hard at the joke. Like, why do they want to show everyone else that they think that joke is funny? Are they trying to prove that they're smart? Are they trying to prove that the joke doesn't apply to them? What's going on with that unusual behavior? And that's how psychoanalysis takes place. So if someone gets real worried that you're going to psychoanalyze them, what is it they're worried that you're going to find? They're just kind of calling attention to themselves, ironically. We mentioned stages of psychosexual development several chapters ago on human development, and if you'll remember from that chapter, I don't really know about those psychosexual stages of development. I never studied them, and it's never really influenced my perspective or understanding of human development. It's in the book. There could be questions on it from the exams, but you're not going to learn about it from me, I'm afraid. Adler followed Freud in terms of chronology, but he proposed a different focus when it comes to personality. So not these like psychosexual drives, but this idea of being a unique person and things that are unique to you. So he talked a lot about, actually one of his main contributions is this idea of being inferior. So if you've ever felt like you're inadequate or you're not good enough, Adler recognized this 100 years ago. So inferiority complex is a person's feelings that they lack worth and don't measure up to the standards of others. I've recognized in the classroom that the majority of students feel like they're not as good as the average, which is statistically impossible. There's this strong inferiority complex that people carry with them. And it happens among professors too. Professors feel like they don't belong, or they're play acting, or eventually people are going to find out that they're not as smart as they should be or as capable as they should be. I wanted to say I'm not suffering from that because I'm admitting that I don't know a lot of this stuff, but it definitely applies to me as well. So Adler, as opposed to Freud, recognized that what we think about and what we're aware of are more important than what we're unaware of. So Freud was interested in what's not there. What's missing that should be there? Adler was interested in what was there. And so he recognized, he was focused a lot on what makes a person feel satisfied, makes them feel happy, proud, and feel good about themselves, feel good about their lives. And so he looked at people's careers, things that we often define our identities around, relationships that we have, and then in particular our intimate or romantic relationship, the marriage or girlfriend, boyfriend, fiance, and so on. Erik Erikson gets a very tiny slide here. We talked about him a lot in the chapter on human development. And one of those themes, if you remember, that was psychosocial development. He recognized that who we are and our identity, our personality, is shaped by the relationships we have and what's important for us in those relationships. So if we're trying to survive, then it's like this dependence relationship. If we're trying to show what we can do, then it's this need for recognition. And so personality, in Erikson's point of view, is guided by or defined by the relationships we have that are important to us at each period of life. Jung was a student of Freud's and broke with Freud in some important ways that I'm not going to get into here. But he proposed some concepts that we still have today, one of which is extraversion and introversion. Extroversion, these are social personality traits. Extroversion is being... I wonder if you could hear my stomach growl just then. I guess I'm getting hungry. One of the instincts from the chapter on motivation. Carl Jung gave us extroversion and introversion. Extroversion deals with someone who is energized by being around other people. So like wanting to go to a party and being bored when you're alone, and actually feeling more fulfilled and like you've actualized your destiny by being with others. Introversion, someone who wants to get away from parties. They're not energized. They're drained going to a party. They're energized by spending long periods alone with themselves. And I've actually gone from extroversion to introversion throughout my life. I'm pretty surprised at how drained I am now by social interactions and how much it takes for me to be alone for a long period of time in order to feel recharged again. He also came up with the concept of a persona. And so persona is that root word of personality. It's where we get that. But persona for Jung is something that we hope to portray. And so that would probably be more closely related to identity. So what we hope other people will see when they look at us, which may not be all of who we are. So we might try to cleverly hide things we don't like and display things that we hope people will recognize and attribute to who we are. So if you get to know someone, you may be getting to know their persona and not them specifically. Oh, here's the extroversion, introversion, so I'll let you take a look at that. You hit pause and look at the difference between extroversion and introversion. Karen Horney was a psychoanalyst or a neo-Freudian, I guess a psychodynamic psychologist is how these are characterized if they don't follow Freud all the way. I'm pleased that Horney is included, but I've never really thought about her as a personality psychologist. So she recognized, she wrote quite a bit about anxiety in her book Neurosis and Human Growth, which is a few chapters in that book are really fascinating and worth reading. One of the things she defined about anxiety, which is a huge problem today, anxiety that is, was that you're anxious when you don't know what will happen between now and some other time. So like you're sitting down for an exam, but you don't know what's going to happen during the exam and how it's going to be received by others. So like that gap is where anxiety fills. She also coined the phrase the tyranny of the shoulds, and that is what I'm doing is showing off my knowledge so you don't think I'm an idiot. Persona behavior. We, according to Horney, we torment ourselves and torture ourselves in order to live up to expectations that we feel we ought to live up to. And so I should probably record all these lectures. I should probably read the chapter more carefully. I should probably study harder. I should probably look smarter. These shoulds are like expectations we hold ourselves to, or I'm holding myself to. If I don't reach it, then I'm miserable. And so for Horney, we're just doing all this to ourselves. No one else is making us do this. And so here we have 3 styles of coping that can help relieve anxiety. So I'm not actually familiar with this from her. Moving toward people, trying to be accepted by them. So we relieve anxiety by getting other people to accept us and appreciate us. Moving against, we fight back. That's my method, it looks like. Or no, actually, mine is the last one, which should be number 3. It's listed as 2 here. Moving away from people. So moving toward, moving against. So moving toward in like a good way, an inviting way, an accepting way. Moving against, like aggressively. And then moving away from. And I realized that those have been repurposed by transactional analysis in, what do they call it? The OK Corral. You can look that up if you're interested. The behavioral perspective. If you remember from behavioral psychology, everything that we do, we've learned. And so the way that I'm dressed, the way that I talk, I had glasses here and now I don't. Like all of these are behaviors that have been learned. And so Skinner would argue that who you are is the way that it is because people have reinforced those behaviors. So you could shape someone's behavior if you wanted to, or someone's personality if you wanted to, by controlling what sort of reinforcement and punishment they got from their behavior. So there's also the assumption that you can change your behavior if you wish, your personality if you wish. Then there's the social cognitive perspective, and that is that learning and cognition are sources of individual difference in personality. So you are who you are based on what you've learned. And I want to say, of course, like, no duh. I guess that would be different from you are who you are based on what unconscious drives you have. So it's, I guess, a more detailed version of what Skinner is saying, or a more nuanced version. It's these relationships, it's what you think about them, what you think about what's happening that influences your personality. It still doesn't seem like it's saying a whole lot to me. Reciprocal determinism, not familiar with. Cognitive processes, behavior, and context all interact. Okay. So Skinner would say that I dress the way that I dress because when I've dressed that way in the past, I was reinforced by it, reinforced for it, so I do it more. Bandura would say yes, and the way I dress influences the way that other people respond to how I dress and how they dress. And so there's this interactive process, so it's like behaviorism 2.0. It goes both ways. It's reciprocally causal or reciprocally determined. We also learn by watching other people, so we don't need to experience reinforcement and punishment ourselves. We can watch someone else go through the same process. Of course, we've seen that already. Self-efficacy is the level of confidence we have in our own abilities. You remember from the chapter on, I think, motivation, belief that you can do something, the belief that you are good enough is going to increase your likelihood of doing that. So self-efficacy is closely tied to our personality too. If we believe we're a certain way, we're more likely to act that way. And they give the example of approaching challenges, but probably also hiding from possible failures. Oh, there you go. That's what I just described in reciprocal determinism. See how there's a bidirectional arrow in between behavior, thinking, and environment. So we're influencing all of these things as they influence us. There's a really neat area of motivation psychology dealing with locus of control. I would call this motivation psychology, but I guess that section of the last chapter got too long, and so they've moved it into this personality chapter. Or maybe people can differ in terms of locus of control, so we can call it personality. Locus of control has to do with locus, where something is, control, who's in charge of what you're doing. If you have an internal locus of control, you are responsible for what you're doing, so no one's holding the marionette strings, making you do this and that. If you have an external locus of control, that means who controls you is outside of you. It's external to you. I try to move my hand where you can see it. An external locus of control might be religion. So you believe in a higher power, and that higher power directs you and dictates what you do. So you don't experience what you're doing as your own volition. You experience it as coming from somewhere else. There's actually no problem with that form of external locus of control. The problem comes when you perceive some other person, such as a parent or a teacher or a professor or like a police officer, as directing your behavior. You're only doing it because they're making you do it. That's an external locus of control, and it's associated with all sorts of problems. So they believe that their luck is their fate is determined by luck and other people, so they have no power. But with an internal locus of control, you feel like you can change your life. So there's hope in internal locus of control. There's hopelessness in external locus of control, unless you're religious. So external locus of control in that regard isn't seen as a downside, whereas it is in other examples. Another motivation-seeming topic. So the marshmallow study had to do with a child's ability to delay gratification, and it goes like this. A child was given a marshmallow, and they could either eat the marshmallow or wait, and if they waited, they would get 2 marshmallows. And the ability to wait for the second marshmallow correlates with all sorts of positive things. And so life satisfaction, quality of life, financial success, quality of relationships. But if a child eats the marshmallow compulsively, they can't help it. They have to take it now. That's associated with all sorts of negative consequences. I wonder if they'll have a list here. All right, so more self-control meant better grades in high school, better academic, or poor self-control was academic problems, behavioral problems. I just want to see how many more we've got. Oh, like another 1,000. All right, I'm going to try to go through this more quickly. Humanistic approaches. The humanists believe that who you are is unique and it's good, so you don't need to hide it. So there's this idea of just being yourself, be authentic. That comes from humanistic psychology. the consequences of being inauthentic means you're trying to be someone you're not, so you'll never actualize your true potential. You're actualizing someone else's potential. So you can read about Maslow, Rogers. I also like Fritz Perls for that. Biological approaches look at the genetic foundations of personality, and so a common way of doing that, seeing how much genes are responsible for your personality versus how much your environment is responsible for your personality. We can use twin studies. So they have especially identical twins, they have identical DNAs. And so if personality is genetic, then we would expect them to have the same personality no matter how they were raised. One twin raised in Cambodia, the other twin raised in New York City. We would expect them to have identical personalities, but of course, it's not a perfect relationship. So it's complicated. Temperament is something that appears very early in life. So temperament being they're a generally happy child, a sad or frustrated child, and that's something that was believed to last a lifetime. So easy, difficult, or slow to warm up in terms of their temperament and affect. It doesn't say if that's still believed, so I'm not sure what the conclusion is there, but I guess you're learning that concept. There are 2 dimensions of temperament important to adult personality. Okay. How reactive we are to new or challenging stimuli and how we can control our responses are evidently linked to childhood temperament. I don't know if there's good evidence about this, but this has been a belief that's been maintained for at least 100 years, and that's your body shape. So you have a specific body shape, and there are personality characteristics associated with that body shape. I've always found it to be a little too vague to be helpful, but evidently somatotypes are still being used. I've never heard of cardinal traits or central traits. All right. So Gordon Allport was a psychologist and therapist. I believe he was a therapist. He recognized 3 types of personality traits. The cardinal traits are the big ones. Those are what you'd probably describe yourself as. The central traits make up cardinal traits are rare. Central traits are what make up your personality, but sometimes one trait will dominate, in which case you have a cardinal trait. And then secondary traits are less obvious, and they only present in certain contexts. Holy crap. Gordon Allport found 4,500 words in the English language to describe people and organized them into 3 categories. Wow. Cattell narrowed the list to 171 with 16 dimensions. Okay. Now I'm starting to see something get put together. So that's why you can have one of 16 personalities in some of the personality tests, and they're combinations of those 3 categories. All right. Hans and symbol Eysenck, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. They focused on temperament, believed that our personality traits are influenced by genetics. And so we see introversion, extroversion, neuroticism, stability. All right, so that's just 2 things. The social component and how well we regulate our emotions. Remember at the beginning I mentioned all these different ways of categorizing personality. Apparently there were a lot of stabs at it, and we kind of added to it as time went on. So we looked at a graph like this that Wilhelm Wundt had designed. This is one for the Eysenck, I think. So unstable emotions, so that means your emotions change a lot, or your emotions are stable, and then you're outgoing and extroverted or introverted. And so we can look at those 4 quadrants and recognize those 4 different personality categories. Then we have the 5-factor model. This is the one I like the most. Openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism. You can score high or low on any of those, and your personality will be your scores across all 5. I've got another video where I go through those 5, so I'm not going to go into detail with them here. Good Lord, there's more hexaco traits. I'm not familiar with this one. I don't know the research behind it, but you can see there's a new acronym, and we see agreeableness, extroversion, emotional stability, conscientiousness, openness. So they just added one. Honesty, humility. Interesting. I'm not sure how I feel about that. How honest and humble a person is. I guess that would be unique or distinct from the other 5 in the 5-factor model. Okay, cultural understanding. The big difference culturally, the simplest way to look at this is collectivist cultures versus individualistic cultures. Individualistic cultures are like the United States, most of Europe, where you sink or swim based on how hard you work. So if you fail, you're a failure. If you succeed, you're a success. That's individualism. In collectivist cultures, you represent your family, you represent your tribe, your community. If you fail, your family failed. If you succeed, your family succeeded. If a student plagiarized a paper, the student would not be punished. The school would be punished because the school created conditions to foster that kind of behavior. So when you fail in a collectivist culture, you're letting the entire community down, not just yourself. So Asian cultures are more collectivistic and less extroverted. Central South American cultures score higher on openness to experience. Okay, so it's not just individualism and collectivism. It's also different scores on the big 5 factors. Let's see, Europeans tend to score higher on neuroticism, so Europeans have emotions that are more variable, and Central and South Americans are more creative. They're more open to new experiences. And evidently there are differences between just regions of the United States. So let me zoom in here. The green states are friendly and conventional. I can't read that. It's too small. You can look at the chart of how people differ across the country. I mentioned individualism and collectivism. A lot of ways we test personality is self-report inventories. If you type in Big 5 personality assessment, you can take a personality assessment and get a score. You may be able to do the same with the MMPI, although 338 questions is an awful lot, and you need to pay someone a lot of money to do that for you. There's an example of the questions and the type of items. These are Likert items. You can tell I'm getting bored with this. There's an example of the MMPI. So yes, there are 1,000 questions, but they're pretty easy to answer. Projective tests go back to psychoanalytic inventories, and the idea here is you're given a test that doesn't, or a picture that doesn't mean anything exactly, but you give it meaning by explaining what it's saying or what is being shown. So you're filling in that meaning, and what you choose to fill in is going to differ between you and other people. Therefore, it can be analyzed as unique to you, and then we can come up with all sorts of explanations for what kind of a person you are. And so anything that asks for your interpretation and then analyzing your interpretation would be a projective test. Here's another example. And thank goodness I finally reached the end.